In this section, we're going to explore how we can use motivation and motivational systems to encourage engagement and maximum performance in standardized cognitive testing with young children and early intervention, and particularly with those children who demonstrate great difficulties with either attention, motivation, or anxiety. What we might do initially is spend a little time just exploring the idea of having a motivational style, a way of thinking, of interacting and behaving with a child that's about increasing their motivation to engage or at least attempt answers or attempt tasks. This is particularly in the context because many clinicians perceive that providing any praise or reward contradicts the standardized instructions. And in some manuals it does say that you shouldn't provide feedback to a child or praise, for example saying well done, to indicate they may have got the answer right. And the idea of this is that it somehow will impact upon the child's performance. Might explore that and that logic later on, but for the moment let's assume that we have a child coming in who is highly anxious or very shy or limited in their responses or their cooperation to instructions, or is easily daunted when they start to get items wrong, or simply becomes distracted quickly. How can we use a motivational style? Well, there are a number of elements. One of them is to be thinking about the idea of praising behavior rather than performance, including praising persisting. So for example, if a child does an action which is part of the task, even though they've got the answer wrong, for example, they try to put the puzzle together, they try and put the blocks together to match the design model in the booklet, or they do point to one of the boxes in the matrix reasoning. Without praising performance, we can praise the action. Thanks for pointing, that was great pointing. You did a good job, you pointed to the picture. Particularly if in the previous ones they had made no response at all. So picking up on the right actions to let them know that this is what the task involves. We're not priming or sabotaging in any way their scores. In other words, we're not going to have elevated scores with a child because we have encouraged them to engage with the task. If you see a child with the block design, for example, and they attempt to put it together and they look at the model and realize that it's not the same and they move pieces around, even if they were to get that wrong and you don't want to give feedback about performance, the fact that they have persisted with it, that they attempted it, and particularly if you're seeing that the child may be losing confidence or maybe less likely to want to try the next one because they found that one difficult, to say, well done, you really stuck at that. That was really good work, is not rewarding performance, it's rewarding engagement. Second idea is that we do use animation, commentary, and interaction as a reward for engagement. Again, not because they got the answers right. Some simple ideas of this is noting what the child is doing. As they're doing it, simply commenting that they did the action. Oh, you're putting the blocks together. That's it. To then turn an item into something that can be an interaction. So for example, if the child points to the correct picture and it happens to be the ice cream, say, oh, do you like ice cream? And if they don't answer, well, I love ice cream. I really like chocolate ice cream. Understanding that we can make engagement more something you wish to do as a child, something that is more motivating, as in it is more rewarding or just more enjoyable. And we'll separate out those ideas of what is a motivator versus what is just more enjoyable. But for the moment, the idea that this task is both one that you can enjoy, get more enjoyment out of, therefore I want to do it. It's intrinsically something you want to be part of, but also motivating in that if I do it, I get something for doing it. In this case, it may just be praise. It just may be interaction. The fact that you may use some animation, some noises, as for example, when you turn the page, let's turn the page up. that idea that you do what we do with any young child when reading a book. We bring animation into telling stories. We have fun. The idea that we would, if we did this, would somehow be compromising the standard scores, I think is dubious at best. The idea that if we have maximized engagement, we have compromised the ability to understand a child's maximum cognitive performance. What we may do later on is ask ourselves how much of this scaffolding is required to maintain that engagement. Therefore, we've really done this in a zone of proximal development way. And if that is the case, we have learned more about this child. We know how to maximize their abilities. And I think this is much more useful in writing up a report than simply having a score, and most certainly more useful than having something like child was untestable or didn't engage, therefore it was not possible to come up with a score. For some children, actually making the test a game. Even the idea that if they're going to try and do as many as they can quickly, that we might even count it up afterwards. Again, we're not going to do this with every child, and we're certainly not going to do it with children who are quite comfortable with being tested and see the challenge intrinsically and wish to do it for their own sake. They like the challenge of doing as many as they can quickly or getting the item right, but are also very motivated just simply by the sense of praise of we doing nothing more at the end of the task when it's all done. We're saying thank you or good work. And we might use rewards for completing tasks, actually putting in a reward system, which we'll talk more about in a little while. So I think one of the things that we can certainly consider doing in testing with children is to understand that praising behavior is not performance. So encouraging and praising when children persist, or even when they say or indicate that they don't know the answer or are confused. Let's look at persistence. The child looks at the whole picture, and even if they were to give the wrong answer, but at least made an effort, thanking them for that effort makes it more likely with the next picture they're going to keep with it rather than just simply have given up because they found that one difficult, and with the next page you turn over, not even bother. Regardless of performance, we're not giving information. We can use words like well tried, good effort. You looked at all of the pictures. You're really working hard here. I can see you're doing lots of work. I can see you're thinking about this one. That was a hard one. Well done for trying. You're not giving information about whether it's the right answer or not. Another thing, though, you might do is that you actually encourage and reward or praise, saying things like, I don't know, I don't understand. So if you see a child is not answering the question and you don't know if they don't know the answer or are too shy or anxious to give you the answer, and you can start to see confidence and motivation is slipping away. Saying something like, yeah, this could be a hard one. It's okay if you don't know. And if you don't know, say, I don't know. And if they then say, I don't know, thank you for saying that. Thank you for telling me that you don't know. It's okay. But if you do know, you can tell me. Similarly, words like I'm confused or I'm unsure give you information. So encouraging children to name what they're actually thinking, I can't see as being as a compromise to the test. It simply gives you additional information. And once again, we are not at the point of interpretation at this moment. We're simply administering a test to a child who is highly vulnerable to poor or reduced performance for non-cognitive factors, anxiety, lack of social motivation, poor attention, distractibility. We want to note those factors, but we also want to see what this child is capable of. So when a child does engage in the correct testing behaviors, they're doing the request without focusing on the performance. I think this is something that if you take the structured down approach, that is, you have the maximum amount of scaffolding in place first and then start to remove it over time, you can start proactively from the very beginning. So even when they seem to be doing well, just intermittently dropping in things like, that's great pointing. Oh, you're looking at all the pictures. That's terrific. Another way of looking at it from the sort of structured up approach is if you see a child is just impulsively looking at some of the items, pointing at some of the items without looking, and then you notice they suddenly do the correct behavior, I might praise them for it. Oh, well done. You looked at all the pictures on the page. That's great work. And then I might make a quick note, a little dot or a little mark on the recording form so that I know that that was the moment that I did it. And then what I say is, will that have impact on the subsequent performance or not? So not only is it a way of perhaps maximizing engagement, it's a great way of finding, does this impact upon their not only engagement, but their actual scoring. So I am very tempted, using a structured down approach, that is having the maximum amount of scaffolding, to use lots of praise very early on in the session to create a sense that this is fun and you're going to get rewarded. By rewarded, praised. By rewarded, I mean having your good behavior acknowledged. So I might say, you're sitting really well in your chair. That's great sitting. You're sitting. Just great pointing. You're doing good. You're doing well with these tasks. Again, I'm not talking about performance. I may have turned the page over and just saying, yep, you're looking at each of these pages. You're doing well. When I'm getting the materials out, I'm going to say, that was great waiting. Thanks. Now, one of the terms that is used in some of the intervention approaches within autism, things like the early start Denver model, is not so much one, but certainly within one's other ones. They emphasize naming actions by using the word good. So don't say good boy, good girl, but good sitting, good waiting, good listening. In the early start Denver model approach, they're not so keen on this and suggest that you don't name it. They suggest this isn't something you do with typical children. I think in this regard they're incorrect. I think actually most parents and preschool teachers do regularly praise children for behaviors. They may do it in a much more intermittent way, but they simply will just turn around and say, that was really well done, or that was great drawing. You worked hard on that. That's really good work. Again, we're moving away from performance to behavior. So I think that it is worthwhile using consistent language that focuses on their actions and letting know the actions that you're looking for, because it's those actions that are going to result in greater engagement and better performance. You do want to avoid saying good boy, good girl. It's very hard, and if you're just of that age or that experience, it comes naturally. It just is something we do with children. So to consciously refrain from it and to remind yourself if you have said it, not to repeat it, but rather than saying good boy, good girl, but to say that's great sitting. You're working at this really hard. Don't even need to use the word good if you can find an alternative that's done in a tone to illustrate that you're praising their actions. We're doing assessments with children who are experiencing or have autism, or an intellectual disability, or chromosomal disorder, or extreme attention difficulties, or high levels of anxiety. We're dealing with children who have not up until this point probably had great sense of success in completing tasks and engaging in academic work. Now, not all, obviously, but there's a large number. When those are the children that are coming into your clinic or you're doing an assessment with, to make this something that matches as closely possible their real-world experiences of what adults do with them, for example, at home and in a preschool, and to use animation and commentary and interaction as a reward or a motivational system, as a style of being with them, I think is important. I think the idea that you can expect a child who's very vulnerable to anything that is new, anything that is about demand, anything that is outside their experience, to adapt to the cold, clinical, standardized way that we do cognitive testing, simply compromises them further and is more likely to result in inaccurate assessment where their abilities are underestimated. Though I'm not talking about it much in this section, where much of this is based, where many of these ideas are based in, is that I think that we are selling short many children that could potentially do significantly better cognitively if we were to set up the requisite structures that allow them to engage more positively in the tasks. So in that way, for some children, I have no difficulty in that we make it fun, that I will be chatting with them as we're doing it, that in between items and in between tasks that we might chat, or even do something that they would do in their preschool. And for some children, this might even include playing a small game, singing, or chatting about the items in the same way that if we're reading a book with a child. We don't just stick to reading the script. And therefore, as a motivational style, and by motivation I'm referring in this part to making it intrinsically motivating or making it more enjoyable rather than having a motivator at the end of doing the task, is to make the items more of a game, more of something that is of an activity that they would experience in the rest of their life. Again, I'm going to note that that's what I have done. I'm going to put this into the report, but I'm also going to use it to see what impact it has upon performance. If you think about it this way, if I'm applying a structured down approach, that is, I'm starting with the highest amount of scaffolding, the highest level of scaffolding, which once I have momentum, I may reduce, I may strip away bits of those scaffolds. I might start off with tasks where I have used a very interactive, animated, gamey way of doing it. And when I'm seeing it working, I might then try an activity where I provide none of it and see if it makes any difference at all. And if it doesn't, I go, okay, I'm going to do the next one in that style. And then what I'll know is that it wasn't required, or it was something that created the momentum for engagement that allowed for their true performance to show. I might then look at the scores in those different subtests and see, was there a significant difference? In other words, the tasks that I did at the beginning, were they much more elevated than the scores in the tasks I did once I had removed that scaffolding? And if you don't see a significant difference, then you can be quite confident that that motivational style didn't compromise their scores by elevating them. Alternatively, I might do it the exact opposite way around in a structured up approach. That is, I start off with no scaffolding. I'm doing the testing to standard with no scaffolding whatsoever, no motivational style. And if I am now starting to notice a waning engagement, an increased amount of anxiety, or a loss of motivation, and then start to bring in those styles, and I see persistence, I see them sticking with the tasks, and they look at the scores and don't see a significant elevation in the administration order. In other words, the tasks near the end, the child did significantly better in all of them than the ones at the beginning. I can then again feel quite confident that the motivational style didn't somehow elevate their cognitive performance. We still have the question remaining, did this have impact upon their engagement? And this is where we need to appreciate that difference between the non-cognitive factor, engagement, persistence, no anxiety, focusing of attention, maintaining attention, understanding the instructions, as opposed to how well were they able to actually cognitively complete the task. And I think that if we want to do better assessments, if we want to provide better information, it's knowing how to integrate, though it be qualitative, our understanding of those non-cognitive factors into our synthesis, into our conclusions, and in our reports, and most certainly in the conversations that we have with parents and preschool leaders and teachers. So the fourth part of a motivational style is that what you might do is use very specific rewards after completing a certain number of tasks. In other words, we do a task that's part of is a subtest, as a part of the standardized test. But in between, we might then play a game or do some activity that's a lot of fun. By the way, a speech and language therapist wouldn't think twice about doing this, as would an occupational therapist or an early intervention educator or a physiotherapist. In other words, other disciplines don't see any difficulty with the idea that we would use activities as a motivator to keep children engaged in the session and keeping good behavioral momentum. It's something that we seem to have as a peculiarity within psychology. And I'm not convinced that it's well evidence-based, and it's certainly not for kids when we're assessing intellectual disability, autism, or things like chromosomal disorders. So what we might do is identify the activities they enjoy doing it, and when they've done a few tasks, actually say, we've been doing great work, okay, let's play pop-up pirates, let's do some bubbles. Then what we might do for some children is actually have a motivational system. So for me, the distinction between a motivational style and a motivational system is a motivational style is the way you're interacting. So giving an activity like bubbles or pop-up pirates is simply, after you've done this activity, here's your reward. Here's your motivating activity. It's dropped in. A motivational system is one where the child from the beginning is quite clear that when they complete certain amounts of work, they're going to get a rewarding activity or a motivating activity. That they're going to work towards getting something by completing work. It's a system you have put in place of you do work, you get. So first and then is a smaller, more informal version of a motivational system. It's actually, if we're going to be very technical, known as the Premack principle, but be as that may, it really is a very mini version of a motivational system. But often those visual schedules or the first and thens are more about clarity. A motivational system clearly is emphasizing you do this work and you earn something for doing it. So we can have stickers. We can use stickers. What we need to remember is that stickers and star charts are not effective for all children. Stickers are a secondary reinforcer. They develop meaning for a child because they're associated with praise. And for some children, that's just not going to cut it. But there are other systems that we can use, and we might just look at a couple that I've used in the past that have proven to be very effective. I want to emphasize the value of using choice as a reward principle. The idea that simply giving children choice is a reward. So that when you've done a piece of work, you then get to choose. You get to choose an activity, or you get to choose a sticker, or you get to choose an item that you can then have. The idea that the child gets the empowerment of choosing in of itself can be rewarding. And sometimes it can add value to the reward of the item itself. So in this case, the stickers are quite motivating to this girl. They're even more motivating when they're placed out at the end of each task and she gets to choose which sticker she's going to keep. Now what's quite interesting is that on different occasions this was done by one, you chose which sticker and you got it immediately. But on another occasion it was you choose the sticker and that's the one when we've finished all of the activities you get to take. So the more tasks you do, the more you get at the end. Really that's just matched on what you think is most interesting and grab the curiosity and challenge for a child. And that's more of an art form than it is a science. So another way of thinking about choice is that, in fact, one of the things you might do initially before you start the actual cognitive testing, you have the materials there on the table, you've explained that they're there, but what you do is you say, let's play first. And you just do free play. You allow the child to select from the cupboard or from the box anything they want to play with, one at a time. And when they show interest, you close the box, you close the press, and you play with that, or you simply watch them playing with it. And by doing this for a 10, 15, or 20-minute period, you get to notice what they like. Of course, you can ask a parent, but sometimes it's good to know on that day what grabs their attention the most. because interests can vary given the time of the day and the week. And then what you do is you, after a period of time, let them know, you count down 5 more minutes and then work time, and you find the toys that they've shown the most interest in, and as they're finishing up, you say first work and then we'll play more with, and the toy they have shown, or toys they've shown the most interest in. By the way, when you look at this little fella here, who rather than play with the toys functionally, rather than play in any sort of imaginary way with the cars and the other vehicles that were there, instead just wanted to take all the toy airplanes and line them up. You might be thinking about this somewhat diagnostically. And in another section we'll talk about the fact that sometimes you can glean an enormous amount of very useful information in a cognitive assessment or even in a developmental assessment that can add to your assessment for autism or be indicative of autism, and in some cases replace the need to bring them in for a specific play-based assessment session like the ADOS. For some children, particularly those who demonstrate limited interests, I will deliberately use their highly preferred toys from home. We may not have them in the clinic, I may not be able to access them in time. So for some children, I know this is Lego. Lego tends to be very popular. So either organizing for the parents to buy a small pack of new Lego, or for me to organize getting some that we keep on or that we will buy and then the parents will take home. There's a variety of ways you can do it, or you simply get the parents to bring the stuff they have from home. It's in the bag, and you let the child know that as soon as we've finished our work, we will then get to play with the items that you're most interested in, or I'll read you your Thomas the Tank Engine book, or we'll play on the iPad together. Now again, this is not something you're going to introduce as a reward after just one activity. Because again, if it's a highly preferred toy or activity, you could have significant difficulty bringing them back to the tasks. But as a motivational system, where they're earning tokens, that when they've completed all 4 pieces of the work or 6 pieces of the work, we're then going to play using their highly preferred toys, or using something you know that's of novelty around something they really enjoy, like a new Thomas the Tank Engine book, can be extremely motivating and engender engagement where there may have been very little. This is particularly with kids who are within the autistic spectrum. We'll see that again and again, where they can be very low in their motivation for doing work just to please you, or just because they understand that's the social expectation of doing something with a stranger or a professional, but will do it if they're going to get something concrete that they want at the end of it. And again, just recognizing that the variations that you can use, the nuances, the adaptations to all of this are quite large. And that for some children, that actually having the reward on the visual schedule, or even having the reward actually on the table or in sight but out of their reach, is required to maintain their attention, or to bring them back when they start to lose motivation or attention, to remind them that this is what we're working towards. And sometimes I'm quite conscious that my motivational system, so rather than a motivational style where we just have a little bit of fun with some pleasurable activities interspersed between the tests, we actually from the beginning are explaining to the child that we'll be doing a piece of work and then doing a play activity. In other words, we're engendering, we are inciting their motivation through a motivating activity, or inciting their engagement through a motivating activity. We're letting them know we're going to do 2 pieces of work or 1 piece of work, then we're going to play with the bubbles. Then we'll do another piece of work and play with pop-up pirates. Yes, this will prolong the session. And this can make it much longer than it otherwise would be. The reason we're doing it is that if we didn't, we may not get completion of the tasks. In other words, it's a scaffold to maintain engagement so we're able to get a score where we otherwise wouldn't. There are times where you might use this in a structured down approach. You start off with them, and as they're showing good performance, you go from 1 to 1 to 1 to 2 to 1 to 3. That is, after the first activity, they get a motivating reward. They get a rewarding activity. After the second activity, task, they get a rewarding activity. But then, if that is working and you're seeing that they've got good engagement, you might do sub-test 3 and 4 before you do the rewarding activity. You might simply say, now we're going to do 2 pieces of work, and then we're going to play Pop-Up Pirates again, or do the fishing game. You might have a variety of rewarding activities. And again, rewarding activities here is being used in the sense of, if you do the work, you get to do this activity you want, as opposed to just simply having a fun activity or embedding the task that you're trying to do within something that is more fun. Timothy and Dylan are 2 boys with autism who demonstrated not only the power of using individualized reward systems, but also made me question quite strongly the validity of unscaffolded assessments. Timothy and Dylan were 2 boys who both came into the clinic, and in a structured up approach, the tests were administered first without any scaffolding whatsoever. These were both boys that had, on the face of it, good levels of language. They were both autistic, and both appeared as if they were going to engage. But in both cases, when doing the assessment, their scores came out in the range of having an intellectual disability. With Dylan, it was his father who was present for the session, and not only was shocked, but was angry at the idea that it was suggested that his boy had an intellectual disability. Now, as a therapist, our default could be to become defensive or try and justify our assessment. But he was adamant. And again, it could have been very easy, given that he would have come from a much poorer part of the town I was working at that occasion, and culturally speaking, would have spoken in a way that could have caused offense. But by pausing for a minute and trying to understand what he was saying, when he used words like, but he can do that at home, by having a conversation with it with a more openness and not feeling the need to defend the results, the dad was able to describe a whole series of things that he did at home that, on the face of it, did appear he was more able than had happened in this clinic, if you were to take the standardized scoring from a test administered in a standardized way. He'd also shown some stereotypical phrases, including repeating something that I hadn't been able to understand, I hadn't comprehend, I couldn't hear properly what it was he was saying. And he said, and I just asked the dad, what did he just say there? Because he says it a lot, and he says, and your time begins now. I mean, not understanding what this was about, simply asked the dad, okay, what does that mean? Or why do you think he's saying that? In other words, in a spirit of genuine inquiry, asking a parent who knows their child better than I do, what was his views? And he said, well, his greatest interest is Countdown, a TV show I had never watched before and knew nothing about. And I said, oh, and asked what that was, and the dad explained it was a quiz show. At this point, at the end of this session, had re-established some level of rapport with the dad, because there was an openness to the fact that my standardized assessment may not have been accurate. It may not have truly measured this boy's abilities. So we agreed that we could redo the testing. So we had this as a discussion as a possibility. There are 2 aspects to this. One is that you can simply use an alternative test, but even if you were to use the same test, and even if you're concerned about practice effects, if you do use some of the supplementary items, you could at least informally get a sense of whether they were much more able to perform if they're able to perform much better. So we had opportunities, we had possibilities here. We agreed that we would retry it, and through some discussion over the next couple of weeks, we agreed that we would retry it, but we would use a reward system, because his dad was convinced that he simply wasn't trying, that he just simply didn't put the effort in. So we watched Countdown and realized that this was about doing your maximum performance in a set period of time. So what we did is we decided to redo the test. What we agreed is to break it into two sections, where I would do the supplementary tasks, in other words, the tasks that I hadn't already done as part of the WIPSI, and just see how we went. So we did that. And then I created this reward system where there were spaces for each of those tasks on that supplementary test, the supplementary tasks. And what we did is we set it up in the clinic, and we explained that we were going to do a countdown. We were going to play a game of countdown. And for each task, I would start off by saying, giving the instructions and saying, now do as well as you can, as quickly as you can, and your time begins now. And he would then repeat the phrase back, and your time begins now. And then he engaged in the task. When we did those supplementary tasks and we took a break, we did 4 or 5 of them, and we took a break and he was given some toys to play with. We sat down. At this stage there both mum and dad in the room. Dylan's mum had come along as well. I just said, can I have a couple of minutes? And I scored up the task that we did, and I placed it on the standard score chart in the manual. And what I found is that his scores were smack bang mid-average range of ability for every single one of the tasks. The point here is he had gone from performance that had placed him in the range of an intellectual disability to being in the average range on subtests by doing nothing more than using a reward system that grabbed his attention. He put effort in where previously he had not. The question they put to you is, which is the more accurate assessment? The one that is administered through standard protocol but comes out with an intellectual disability, or that with scaffolding that gave him no extra assistance in completing the items? The tasks were still new. Though it had a practice effect from the previous week of sitting in the room doing the work, he had no practice effects with the items. I ask again, which is the more accurate assessment? For I am in no doubt whatsoever that I had a more accurate insight into his cognitive capacity with the second test than the first. I also had much more information around the factors that influenced his performance, which was motivation and engagement. He was autistic. He didn't do work if he didn't see the point in doing it. He didn't do work to please me. He did things on his own agenda. Once I had found that method that both intrinsically motivated, in other words, the task itself was interesting and captured his attention and gave him a chance to perform in a way that he saw as motivating, he did extremely well. Similarly with Timothy, we did the testing in a clinic setting with his, again, dad present. And it's just coincidence that these two boys just had their dad present in these first assessments. And Timothy simply didn't engage. He just didn't do anything. He talked, but talked about what he wanted to talk about. He took the items, but played with them in the way he wanted to play with them. Again, he was autistic. He had been diagnosed as autistic, and this was part of an assessment and get ready for school. And so it could have been quite easy to have concluded that either he was untestable or that he had an intellectual disability, because on the few items, on the few tasks that he had actually responded, if you were to take those scores, he would have come out within that range of a mild intellectual disability. However, rather than concede defeat that an assessment was not possible, or feel the pressure that it had to be done that day, just had to the dad and said, well, let's just look at this. And through our chat, it became very clear that he did very well with the preschool, and that the parents had an enormous amount of respect for what the preschool leader, whose name was Aoife, had achieved in the last year, and that had taken him from not engaging at all to doing lots of work. So agreed to talk to the preschool leader, chatted to the preschool leader, and the preschool leader felt that it was quite possible that he would engage much better if it was done in the preschool. So I went out to the preschool and we set up a work system that replicated the one he had there. And when this was done, including some assistance from the teacher herself, the preschool leader herself, Timothy engaged with all of the task with considerable difficulty, it must be said. We had to take breaks. The preschool leader had to take over on certain occasions. We had to give high levels of reward, and we had to do it over a good 2-hour period where he was doing other things, including going out and playing. But at the end of all of that, he again came out in the cognitively average range. Now, was he able at this moment in time, or at that moment in time, to enter into a mainstream classroom and spend all morning and learn in the same way as the other children? No. But it wasn't a cognitive problem. It was a motivational problem. It was a lack of engagement. So if we were to do work on engagement and work on motivation, his capacity to learn information was equivalent or near enough the same as other children. Having this understanding of children, I think, is pivotal. Understanding that things like anxiety, that attention, distraction, tiredness, lack of motivation are important factors impacting upon performance is important. And actually using a scaffolded methodology gives us greater confidence that they're the factors in play. In other words, if children do better because of the scaffolding, we then understand that there are non-cognitive factors in play rather than us guessing it because they simply didn't engage, and we have to make an estimate of what we think might be happening. So in conclusion, when we're thinking of conducting standardized testing of children, particularly with cognitive tests, where it is simply a score that we're looking for, using things like motivation as a scaffold might in fact give us more information, not less, and make us more confident in our conclusions, not less.